Welcome to Conscious Dominance, a DSRX studio production with Eric and Andrew. In our weekly conversations, we explore how we approach our committed relationships as a powerful catalyst for mindful leadership and inner dominance. As men who intentionally lead our powerful feminine partners, we share insights for discovering how the craft of consciousness deepens our capacity to love, serve, and connect with our true selves.
I was excited to talk to you today about something that I don't think I've ever talked to anyone about. It wasn't obvious to me right away what exactly it meant and what I thought it meant and what it was after reading the book and the chapter were almost like a deeper inflection point on it. And that's to be impeccable with your word. And my initial thought when I read that was like, oh, be honest and be in integrity. And I was like, okay, I get that. And then when I read the chapter, it was so much more than that. It felt like it was deeper and more conscious, and it asked for a level of consciousness that superseded anything that up to that point that I think that I had in my life. And I remember reading this chapter and being it was one of those like paradigm shifts for me in my life that I had never read somewhere, anywhere, and been aware of how much my inner dialogue was contributing to my life and to be careful with that inner dialogue. And I felt like the impeccable with your word was a call out to be honest, but it was also a call out that the foundation of consciousness and being conscious was to be able to see what was going on in your head and what was the language and the words that you were using to yourself or that I was using to myself. And I was aghast, I was appalled at the language that was being taking place in my head. And I would love to get more into that, but before I do, I would love to volley it your way and see what initially comes to mind when that with that agreement with be impeccable with your word.
Too, in reading this book the first time, and probably for a little different reason. I haven't had the excessively harsh inner dialogue in the same way I think that a lot of people do. I've had my own issues, no doubt, but that's been less of one for me. Bigger thing that really impacted me was seeing for the first time how impactful language is. And for me, it was like in what I say, what I speak out loud, how much that can be impacting the world around me and the world that I'm living in. How other people see me, how I perceive other people and other things. Because for me, in what was more of an avoidant shutdown and unconsciousness, I was less being hard on myself, and I was more being extremely, I'll just say it very directly, I was being very manipulative of the world around me, trying to control it in a way that helped me keep my own patterns afloat. And
Mm.
so the integrity piece of this, when I started seeing the impact that my little white lies could play, that they could have on my life, when I started seeing the impact of how I was showing up in the world when I was telling half truths, trying to impress other people, or embellishing things to look a little bit better. And I didn't even notice I was doing this. It was such an automatic, unconscious thing. But this was the most challenging one for me because I would do things like I would finish a workout and I would say that I did 3 sets when I only did 2. I would just, these little embellishments that didn't even matter. It's like, I was still deadlifting 400 some fucking pounds, but I had to make it look even better than it was. Even as, like, even as I improved and got better, and I was in my own personal growth journey already at this point when I read this book, I still found it necessary. Some part of me found it necessary to embellish, and seeing how those little patterns really played out in my life was a super impactful one.
Do you have any other examples? I like the example of the deadlifting. Do you have any other? Tell me another example of a time, of a place.
I don't remember the specifics of this, but I do remember something about it, because Dawn and I were out on a walk, and the day before we had been out with a bunch of friends, and I remember her calling me out on this. And this is why our woman can be so damn impactful for us, because it just really bothered her that she heard me embellish something that was, I don't even remember what it was. It was so insignificant. It was inconsequential what it was, but it was just like, you said this, and I knew it was actually just like this. And I don't know why you even needed to embellish it like that. But she's like, I hate that. If you like, you're lying for no reason.
Right.
And that was a real kick in the shorts.
Right.
Because
And I
she's
think
fucking, and I couldn't defend myself.
it's what it feels like is it feels like taking a shortcut.
Yeah.
And it's a next level of integrity. It's not, there's, I think you said at one time where there's like kindergarten integrity. It's don't lie. Okay, we got that. I'm not lying.
Yeah.
And then there gets to be this thing where you feel like a lawyer or you feel like a politician where you're weaseling out of something.
I call it
And if
mental
you're ever in that,
gymnastics.
yeah, mental linguistic, it's not exactly like that. That's what this is calling out. It's saying, like, impeccability with your word is a degree of conscientiousness that what's happening inside is what's happening outside. If you're scared and you're feeling like you have no idea what's going on and they're making up stuff that you have no idea that you're actually doing, that's dangerous, right? There's a danger in that. And that's maybe a little bit of an extreme example, but it can play out in other examples where it's maybe, oh, did you work? Were you working on your computer? Oh, yeah, I was getting a lot of work done. Or, yeah, that's work. And is it really work that you were working on? Or is it, I mean, before we got on the call, before we got on this, we started talking about, and I was talking about the thing about being on a computer is that it really lends itself to distraction and it lends itself to work that's pseudo work that's not actually the job. When I did construction, it was really clear what the job was for that day. And it was easy to tell the people that worked for me, hey, this is what we're doing. This is the job. This is focus. And you didn't want to mission creep, which is like when the mission shifts. But I think it's very easy for work to mission creep. And then when you're reflecting on that work and you're telling someone else, being impeccable with your word is admitting where you're at. And admitting it's not it's not necessarily overstating negatively about where you're at either. That's also part of it too. It's the reality. And you're not saying something to elicit a response. You're not saying something because you want, that's what you were saying about manipulation, to elicit someone to feel some more empathetic to you or sympathy or creating a picture that puts you above someone else, or you're not maneuvering in what you're saying to achieve an end result, which is like strategizing. And I think there's a presence, like a literalness that and a humility that is necessary, but at the same time, you're not saying anything that's not what you're feeling. And if people feel you in that frequency, they actually trust you and your woman trusts you. And that's what you're saying, is that there's any embellishment. I like that word embellishment, because that over, it might be a little slight. It might be a little bit of just a little kind of fluffiness or squishiness. And I think when you feel that squishy kind of energy, people don't trust it.
Yeah, when we're not being impeccable with our word. And for me, when I was in this pattern of exaggeration, what I
Yeah.
was really trying to do was get something more than what I had earned. And to get a more admiration or more empathy or more something than what I actually earned, because I didn't think reality was good enough. I was
Right.
judging myself in relation to reality, and I was always coming up the loser. So I had to make myself, like, pump myself up just a little bit. And it was very subtle at times. Like I said, I would just, and meaningless shit too. Like,
What?
just meaningless shit that
Yeah.
I would do that
Yeah, exactly.
didn't even matter.
Doesn't social media lend itself to that? Doesn't a lot of small talk lend itself?
Yeah.
Even when someone asks you how you're doing or how's business, and you embellish a little bit, or you maybe tilt it just a little bit just to make sure you look a little better, or if you're with your woman and you want to just highlight, but you extra highlight a little bit, or extra go down this way, or
Yeah.
extra blame the other person. There's anytime where you're fudging it a little bit, it's literally the same as when, again, going back to the construction, or if you're a baker and you fudge the measurements, and you try to build a house where you fudge the measurements, or you fudge, oh, it's 3/4 of a cup. That's all right. It's half a cup's fine. It's not fine.
No.
It's not fine. Oh, it's 3/4 of an inch. Oh, half an inch is fine. It's not fine. That's not fine at all.
Nope.
Or it's an eighth off. That's not fine over time. Like, it matters. And it's the same thing if you try to build a relationship and everything's like an eighth of an inch off or a quarter of an inch off. Over time, you're not actually, that person's not relating to you. They're relating to something that's not solid. So a fake version, an embellished version, and it will be tested. So when the weather comes, or something's off in your own life, you'll collapse under that, or she'll collapse with you,
Yeah.
and you won't be able to handle her collapse. And it's truly your capacity, my capacity to keep my promises, my capacity to speak with integrity. That's where I get confidence. Confidence, yes, has to do with something out in the external world, but it's based upon a foundation of what you do in your private world and in you with yourself. So my religion is whatever I do in private. My spiritual practice is whatever I do when no one's watching. My integrity is whatever I do when she's not watching. My impeccability is, that's the foundation. So everything that I achieve on outside of that, that's like a house or a building that you take a long time and nothing's happening. You can't see anything happening. There's all this work being done on the foundation. Then all of a sudden you start building, and then it can withstand. But if you just start trying to build without that foundation, that's like trying to achieve something out in the world where you haven't lived up to your own promises. If you try to have external promises on the outside world prior to keeping your own internal promises with you with yourself, it's like it doesn't work. And I think that impeccability, what you just said too, is if I'm keeping track of myself and what are my goals and what am I trying to do and I'm trying to achieve, or I made a commitment to myself with this, and then do I feel like, oh, I did it, and I did it and I didn't, and I said I was going to do 5 sets, like the sets ones are good, but I only did 4. Do I write in that I did 5? Do I think to myself that it was enough? Because it's the same thing of of the measurement. Measurement is a spiritual practice. Like, what we measure is a foundational spiritual practice, and impeccability is related to measurement.
And came to terms with the word congruence and why I use that word when I teach dominant men. Congruence is being the same person on the inside and on the outside, being the same
Right.
person in private, in secret, as you are with your woman, as you are with your friends. And to really be congruent, you don't change other people's perceptions of you. You have to align yourself with reality. I had to come into agreement with the truth, into
Yep.
acceptance of the reality of what the hell was happening.
Yep.
And that's tough when you are looking at yourself and judging yourself as not living up to some expectation, some external expectation. For me, I had to come to grips with the fact that I was a liar and decide that I didn't want to be a liar anymore, because the reality is we think we're getting away with it. If you're doing that
Hmm.
construction project and you quarter inch here, eighth inch there, you might feel like, okay, I saved myself the 5 minutes of recutting that 2x4, or I saved that 3 minutes. Like, I got away with something. You didn't get away with
Hmm.
anything. When I'm basing something on something that's not true,
Hmm.
I am out of alignment, and something will balance those scales. And
It's leaky.
yeah, the longer that I went, and the longer that anyone goes playing this game of looking for, and maybe even getting false results from
Mm.
other people based on untruths, based on not being impeccable with how you're speaking and how you're living, eventually those scales are going to tip. And so and they did for me, they will for everyone eventually, somehow or another. Everything is going to come back into balance, because life always does.
It's very true. It's very true.
Something you
And
said earlier, Eric, that I want to touch on before I lose it here. You were talking about that inner dialogue and how it contributes to what you are experiencing out of yourself. It's also indicative, right? Because not only is it showing you how you're showing up in the world, but it's also indicative, like, what goes on inside of us shows us. And for me, that's what this was. It was indicating to me that I had a problem with being okay with reality. So
so
those places where we're out of impeccability, where we're out of integrity in whatever way, we can either try to fix it by getting away with it, or we can let it indicate to us where we have something out of alignment in ourselves.
it's really well true. Said Rachel's really helped me so much with calling out with that when I speak ill of myself in my interior dialogue, and that I'm constantly speaking ill. What I'm speaking ill to and within myself is often the parts of myself that I would say are more feminine. And she's like, if you can't handle the feminine inside of you and you're disrespectful of the feminine inside of you, how do you think you're going to be able to respect the feminine that's in front of you? And really felt like a call out. And it really asked me to really be radically gracious and forgiving and kind to the parts of myself that I felt were more feminine. And when I stopped judging them and stopped thinking they were negative and stopped thinking it was worse or less than, is really when I felt like I had more range, more accessibility to more qualities, to gentleness and to a sensitivity and to a lot of qualities on the external world that also to rest and to quiet and to a serenity and to a capacity to be more attentive. A lot of qualities that I've had in the past, but I've often didn't value or didn't judge them or didn't necessarily saw them as inferior to these other qualities. And that interiority and what happens in the dialogue in here is going to are the seeds of what happens out there. And I think the being impeccable with the word in the book, he calls your word is spoken ill is black magic. and that the word is magic, and that the word is the seeds of manifestation, and that the word doesn't take place just in the external world, that what we're thinking actually is actually a direction and sends this way. Because Rachel is someone who can literally read my mind. When I say that, I'm not kidding. Like, she can actually feel what I'm feeling in a really sensitive way. It's forced me to be super aware and conscious of what I'm thinking, and not think that it's enough to just not act on it. I'm like, oh, it was just a thought. Like, is that a big deal? But if I'm cultivating thoughts or nurturing thoughts unconsciously, and I'm having unconscious thinking, that's going to eventually come out and eventually become made manifest out in the world. And to be impeccable is to not just be impeccable with the words that we actually say, but it's actually the words that formulate in our head, to become aware of them. First step. Second, what are the patterns? Third, is it black magic that we have in our head, or is this a magic that's ultimately what we need to be serving is love in its biggest form? That's the whole point of us being human, is in its ultimate manifestation is a love that exceeds the love just for the individual, but a love beyond person, and a love that is of redemption, that we are redeeming what it is to be compassionate and to be alive to our potential, and to love the gap and the parts of ourselves that we don't necessarily love. And that if we constantly are hating on ourselves, the great sort of place to love is actually in ourself, the parts of ourself that we don't love. And that when we can find a way to love the parts of ourselves that we don't love, that's when we feel healing. And it's been a powerful place for me to learn how to love the parts of myself that I didn't think were worthy of being loved. And what I realized is, as I've done that, I've become had access to more of my sexual virility, more of my sexuality, more of my power, more of my energy, more of my consciousness, more of my all of me. That love unlocks potential juice in us. And I think that's where this book and this agreement of being impeccable with your word has this. It's the foundational quality of unlocking what it is to be a magician, what it is to be someone who could create and alchemize and manifest and turn ideas into things, and ideas into a reality that's much bigger than what we could ever imagine.
I love the way you laid all of that out. And I think it's probably important to touch on this whole concept of the metote that he talks about in this chapter of the book too, because all of that unworthiness, again, I'm going to come back to this word indicative, and I like how we're being impeccable with the words that we are using in this episode, but the way that we are really breaking apart these words that we're using and what they mean to us. This is how we do this. This is how we be impeccable with our words, by being intentional with what we speak. Coming back to the word indicative, to indicate something. Any sense of unworthiness that we have is built upon the beliefs, or as he uses in this book, the word agreements, the beliefs that we adopted at a point in our life when we were young and basically too unconscious to know any better. We decided to believe certain things. And every single human being does this. And so every single human being is living their life in some semblance of a dream. The distortion of the lens of their own beliefs that are based on their own experiences that are unique to them as an individual. And so we have an entire world full of people where everyone is going through their life with all of these distortions, and everyone thinks they're dealing in reality, and everyone is dealing in a distortion. And so we don't even know that. I think we said this in a recent episode. A different version of you exists in the mind of every single person who knows you. You aren't the same to any two people, and nobody knows you as you know you. So there's this giant, he calls in the book a mitote, this whole world full of just imagined realities. And this concept of impeccability is about coming out of that dream and landing back in reality using language.
So true, isn't it? That if you just were super careful about what you actually said and you only spoke what was happening inside of you and you were impeccable with being congruent and you said only what you meant. You didn't just say the truth, but you only said what you meant. On one hand, you're going to irritate people. You're going to piss people off. You're going to make people sad. You're going to be disruptive, but you're also going to be impeccable with your word. And that's a foundation with which you can build all the love and kindness and gentleness you want out in the world that people are going to receive in a really positive way. But that only comes on the other side of speaking your truth. If you speak a truth to yourself out there, where you start being kind and gentle and all the little sweet things, but that's not how you feel, you're full of shit. And it's going to die. It's going to come collapsing on you.
Yep. That's
If
what
you
I said
feel like
earlier.
you're an asshole,
you're not getting away with anything.
You're not getting away with anything. If you feel like you're pissed and you're an asshole and you got to say it. You got to be where you're at. And that gets into this thing where it's like, okay, well, if I'm pissed and I'm angry and it's going to be really cruel and all that, it may need to work its way out. But if you get into a practice with that, you really ask yourself, are you really angry? And you had someone, or are you just sad? And a lot of times when you're really angry and if you're really impeccable with your word, a lot of that inflamed feeling that happens, I know from my experience, I'm not actually angry. And I've dealt with anger and rage issues a lot in my life. I'm not actually angry. I'm actually incredibly sad. I'm an incredibly traumatized little boy who was a little boy who didn't have a capacity to say what he was really feeling or to feel what he was feeling. And so it's pent up. And that to speak those, to be impeccable with your word is actually to really sit with myself, be like, what is the exact word that represents the feeling that I'm feeling right now? And that's a really powerful tool. It's something that Rachel's Mudroom and her courses and things that she's done with Hiroshi has helped me so much in being aware that the muck of my emotions is not necessarily a problem or bad. And that as soon as I judge them and I condemn them and speak ill of them, I shut them down and I'm not even able to look at them. It's almost like the parts of ourselves that won't admit where we're at is don't look there. It's like a bouncer. It's like someone it's like the bodyguard of you want to get in the club and there's all this fun in the club and there's the bouncers that are here, the bodyguard, that person, that's way a lot of we think our emotions, but they're actually just the bodyguards of our actual emotions. That the bodyguard is actually the surface emotion that's not actually what we're really feeling. It's just a protector. Yep. And I that's not my own original thinking. I remember that it was the Eternal Family Systems by Dick Schwartz. This guy, it's a kind of way of thinking about what's happening inside of you. And he talks about these different sort of characters inside of you and these different family. And that one of them is this protector role. And I think it's a great metaphor and it's actually very literal. And then if you could soften that protector and say, buddy, I thank you. I really appreciate the way you've shown up for me. And I honor you. You've done a lot of good. It's the same way of talking to somebody who's like really, you just be like, it's cool. We're cool, buddy. I see you doing a lot. I really appreciate you. I need to get you. You're respectful and kind to that, but most people are. We want to fight against that, and we dismiss that, and then that can break aside, and then we can come in. That this is what it is to be impeccable, because the impeccability is not reactive. It's not being reactive.
Now we're back to
and I
that
think
word.
reactivity is not. This is where I want to parse this out, because I think if someone says, say only what you mean, I'm like pissed and I want to fucking say whatever I want to say. Fuck you. And, that's what I mean. No, that's what you think you're meaning right now when you're inflamed and when you're in a fight or flight kind of state. But is that actually really what's going on inside of you? And I think whatever comes across that you have to say in the moment, and that you feel urgent, I feel urgent, and whether or not that's trauma speaking, that's somebody where I just recently heard somebody said that if you feel like you have to say it right away, and this is how I feel with Rachel too, that if there's urgency in what I have to say, that's often my trauma that's speaking. And it's not actually really what I'm feeling. It's actually my little boy, the island, these little parts of me that are wounded. That's them speaking, looking for mom's approval, looking to feel better. And if I could just know when I get inflamed, that's a time for me to check out, unless it truly is a fight or flight moment, but that's rare. Instead, I get that rage, and then assess right away, is this really, do I need this? Okay, I don't need this in this moment. It's time to take a time out, pause, breathe, feel, do the practices that get you back into equilibrium. And then that impeccability is through the journaling, through the reflection, through the meditation, what actually is feeling, what am I feeling in these moments? That's the impeccability, is not a reactive kind of impeccability. And that mitote, that kind of thing that he was saying about, that's a lot of this false version of ourself. And if you start piecing together these family systems and these, that yourself isn't really one thing, it's actually these different competing energies. And the self that's able to see a lot of those competing energies and not judge any of them, that's actually your true self. The true self is the one that can see that everything is like this, sees it all, and then makes a decision from that place, honoring all of it, and seeing that every decision I make, often as an adult, is a decision between two things that maybe suck. And one sucks a little less than the other. Or both are awesome, and one just makes a little more sense. They're not obvious always what to make those decisions. And a lot of that is arrived because we were able to look at all these different, and that's the work of what it is to be impeccable with our.
Yeah, the truth doesn't have an agenda, and it's not in a hurry, and it's not going to change whether or not I speak up and defend myself.
Yep.
The truth will still be the truth tomorrow and 5 years from now, because the truth just is.
Yep.
One of the phrases that I remember coming to for myself, and this was probably 3 or so years ago now, was this idea of integrity to the moment. Kindergarten level integrity, like we talked about. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal, right? That's what we were taught when we were 5. A more advanced level of integrity is, in this moment, am I doing not only what I say, but am I being who I am? And am I showing commitment to what it is that I'm in the middle of, that I'm in process with? Because there's word in impeccability of the word externally in what you speak, or internally in what you speak to yourself. Those are two expressions of that concept. But another one is, am I actually fully present with what it is that I'm doing right now? Or is my mind floating off somewhere else? Am I half focused because I've got some podcast playing in my ear while I'm trying to work? Am I not all the way here because I have 7 different things that are all, like, all the browser tabs open on my desktop that are in my mind? Am I in integrity to this moment? Am I impeccable with the words that I am currently generating and what I'm creating, what I'm working on, what I'm focusing on? Am I all the way there? Reality. And that's something I couldn't do it back then. I would say I'm going to go, I'll use your example, like I'm going to sit down at my computer and work on something. But I would work on it a little bit and then I'd flip over and check this and I'd look at that and I'd check my email when a notification came in and then I'd go back and work on it a little bit more. And that idea of integrity to the moment was also born out of this chapter of this book, that I need to be true to myself in the moment to moment pieces of life.
Yeah, it's true. The word, when you talk about anything and the process of putting something into words, is really also a process that's the beginning process of anything that's bigger than us, that's more than us. And if someone's able to be very articulate about and then move that with their energy, they can literally affect the world and change the world. And we saw that he uses the example in the book of Hitler and how Hitler was able to, just through his word and just through the way he spoke, galvanize the people that were extremely intelligent. The Germans are not stupid people. They literally are the most advanced, intelligent people. And it was dark magic. He was able to use dark magic on people. And people, if you're not impeccable, being impeccable with your own word will actually be less susceptible to dark magic. Because if I'm have a habit of being impeccable with my word, then I'm going to have a habit of doing inventory and auditing of what I'm saying. And I think an integral part of white magic is self-auditing, is self-inventory, and not being a tool of someone else's black magic. I feel like we're either unconsciously, we got three choices. You're either doing consciously white magic, consciously black magic, or consciously a tool of someone else's black magic. And I think that most people are actually a tool of other people's black magic. And most people's black magic, there's a momentum of gossip, a momentum of unconscious sort of behavior or even conscious behavior that manipulates people and gets them saying and doing things. And auditing, self-auditing, self-reflection, this capacity to look at ourselves, that is the tool that is the lead indicator of impeccability. The impeccability is the result of auditing, self-auditing.
Auditing. Well, before we hit record on this podcast today, we were talking about like how business was going, and you asked me a question, and before I answered it, like I have this process now automatically where especially because I know that my pattern has been, when someone's like, how's it going? I'll be like, great, actually, this great. And I would like, this great would be even a little bit better than it really is. That's the old pattern.
Right.
So now the self audit is when you ask me a question like, how is your business going? And how are the sales, whatever that question was that you asked me, before I answer it, there's just a quick little internal check. Is this true, what I'm about to say? Is it true?
Mm-hmm.
Is it really
Mm-hmm.
true? Because you wouldn't know if it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't. It's only
Mm-hmm.
me inside myself that knows if I'm bullshitting or if I'm telling the truth. So that self-check is that little pause for me to listen to myself and what is about to come out of my mouth, and to not mouth in a way that's untrue.
And I think especially if we're somebody who's naturally, I feel like one of my issues that I've had to deal with is blessed with certain attributes that I come to through hard work. I just got them. For example, I'm tall. Like, I'm a guy. Just those two things gives you a lot of advantages. I'm a white guy. And I had no idea how much privilege I had with that. I had no idea how much advantage I got with that. I had no idea that my capacity to be charming and say things, and that my words, the fact that I was educated and that I was able to use words to get things, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh my God, if I use words like this, then I can get sex. Oh my God. All of a sudden I started becoming a player. Like I was like playing. That's the player, right? You're playing and manipulating the situation. You're playing it as a game. Impeccability goes out the window because you've got something that you want. And then all of a sudden you're unconsciously caught up in that. And I think anytime that there is something that's external to your own integrity, whether it's a female, a drug, even your work,
Money,
those things,
money.
you get caught up in that. You lose the impeccability because that thing out there, the means start to justify the end. So it's a slippery slope. And this is where I feel like one of the things that really felt called out, well, luckily, I would say it's a blessing. My life fell apart. And luckily, everything just got destroyed. And luckily, I hit rock bottom a number of times to wake and slap myself upside the head to get myself together. And it wasn't until I really was in that state that I could reflect and be like, oh my God, that's gross. Look at that behavior. Look at the way I'm acting. Oh, this is out of integrity. Oh, and I grew up with religion. I grew up with a lot of people talking about integrity. I grew up hearing this, grew up thinking I was in integrity. But what I love about this book is it actually gives a damn, an F about what you're feeling. And I felt like a lot of the way that I was presented with integrity, it almost felt like a performance of integrity. It felt like it was more important that people thought you were in integrity and people thought and that you behaved in integrity than actually an inventory of, is this in alignment with what I'm actually feeling?
Yes. Yes, 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 yes. This is why values matter.
Yeah.
And this is why this always has to come back to the individual. It has to be individual, because we can't have integrity to an external standard and have it
Right.
be in truth. Now,
Yeah.
if our internal standard happens to align with an external standard, and now we are in integrity to that external standard by default because we're living up to our own standards and
That's
living to
well
our own
said.
values,
Yeah.
then great. But if we're just acting and playing a part,
Right.
if we're trying to win at someone else's game, we cannot be in integrity.
Because we're also doing it for the wrong reasons. We're doing it
Bingo.
to get the adulation or the respect or the kind of, we're trying to get this fulfillment from the outside that ultimately is shallow. And ultimately, the only thing that we're looking for, it's trite, but it's inside of us already. It's here.
Yeah. It's inside of us because what we really want is to be who we are. What we're after is to be authentic.
Right. It's so true.
To be
so true.
I've probably used this phrase before, and I wish I remember where I got it, but it's driven so much introspection for me, is who would you have been if the world never got to you and fucked you up? Like, what is that version of you that exists before all of the agreements, underneath all of that piece of you, that spark in you that has never changed? What is that? And that's what we're why we do all of this manipulation. It's why we do all this lying. It's why we try to get so much from outside of ourselves. We're trying to fill a hole that we can only fill by just going backwards and realizing there's no hole. The only hole is in the false self that we built. And there's holes all over in it because it's not real.
Right. No, it's so true.
When we go back down underneath all of the agreements that, again, this is this book, when we get back down underneath all those agreements, we find ourselves back at, like, on the ground at the base of just what is. It's
Yeah,
just fucking reality.
it's an incredible gift to be humbled by reality and to become face to face with the reality that you are and who you are and where you are in your life, and to see it clearly without making it worse or making it better, but to see it exactly as it is something that I feel like I was gifted by being an artist and being trained in the old school of drawing, just seeing something in front of me and don't make it more or less, just what it is. It was this great teacher that I had that really helped me to as an ethic. And when I started doing that on myself was a powerful moment, but it wasn't something that came until I had to really sit with myself when everything that I was trying to hold together fell apart. And the power it is in having nothing and wanting a way more, and that being okay, that you're like the gap of what your potential is and where you're at, and being able to be pained by that, but not fall apart by that is an amazing thing, because it can be really deflating. Could be the worst thing in the world. And I think that's what I know as a man that I've struggled with, where I look at my life and I'm looking at the reality of where I am. And then I look at where I thought I could be or where I wanted to be. And there's this big gap, and sitting with that gap and really feeling with that, and not letting that, avoiding looking at that, not avoiding looking at that. I think a lot of addiction is literally because we don't want to sit with that. We don't want to sit with that chasm. And if we have to sit with that chasm and really look at it, I almost feel like, get this picture of like somebody, a guy shoving me. It's me with me being like, look at it. Look at the fuck. This is it. Look at it. Look at the life. Look at everything that you've done. Like, it's an assessment. I think that the recovery, that is a really good organization that forces people to do that. But the capacity to look at that and then not fall apart and actually do something about it is life. Like, that's life. And I think that's the courage, and that's the impeccability. That's really the cornerstone of what it is to be impeccable. And if you're honest and being impeccable with, nobody's there. Like, we're not there. There's always something that's out of alignment. There's always, it's the craft. It's all a craft. It's a craft of impeccability. It's a craft of the consciousness, the craft of consciousness. This is what I teach, what I coach. It's like, it's art, but there is a art to it, but there's also a way to do it. There's a craft. It's not willy-nilly free. So yes, it's art, but it's also a craft. Like, it's both. And it requires courage. It requires daily courage. It requires daily stoicism to be there, to sit with ourselves, and not to take something to numb or to look away from that, and to really sit with that and be with that. And then the other challenge, and I know, and this is, we started off, the whole thing is about conscious dom and women and sex. Have that, and then want to have your sexuality fulfilled. That's part of the gap. Like, it's really easy for men to just turn that part of themselves off, because that's too complicated. It's too hard. It's too difficult. Part of the gap is actually including in that gap what you want, what turns you on, what's your arousal, what lights you up, and surrendering to that. But at the same time, not letting that be something that takes over your life. And that's part of the craft of it all too. It's like, how do you want something without letting that rule you, while you rule it and you dominate? This is the whole podcast. This is what we're talking about. This is attention.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you feel I understand what I'm trying to get at? I feel like, I don't know if I was unclear there, if I was.
It gets tough to be clear. around these things,
Yeah.
right? Because it all comes back to there is a reality, and can I be with it or not?
Right. That's what I'm trying to say.
Right? Can I be with it, as uncomfortable as it is? Do I
Yes.
measure up to where I thought I should be? Where I thought I should be is bullshit. Measuring up is bullshit. There's
Yep.
just where I am. And that's
Yep.
all.
Yep.
And anything else we're comparing to or
Yep.
wishing was different or in somehow in disapproval of what is, like, now we're not in the truth.
Yep.
We're in disagreement with reality. I think maybe a great place to end this is, there's a song lyric that came to me as you were sharing those last thoughts, and it was by a band Passenger. They have a song called Holes. One of the verses in that song says, I know a man with nothing in his pockets, nothing but a rolling stone. He told me about when his house burned down and he lost everything he owned. He laid asleep for 6 whole weeks. They were going to ask his mother to choose. And when he woke up with nothing, he said, I'll tell you something. When you've got nothing to lose. When you are left, when life falls apart, when shit goes south, when you tried to get away with it and you didn't get away with it because you don't ever get away with it, and it all comes crumbling down. Now that is the biggest gift, because now you're grounded, you're landed back in the truth. Like, this is what it is. That's all. Like, this is what's left.
Right.
And now you can actually go somewhere because you're not up in the clouds. You're not in all of these deceptions. You're in truth. You're in, like, the truth is what is right now in front of you. And that's it. That's the truth.
That's so true. And I think the people that are drawn to your lies, you ultimately don't respect them. If you live a false life and there are people loving you because of your false life, you have women and all this stuff, ultimately underneath, you don't respect them. But you live what is, you're true to who you are, you're honest, you're vulnerable, you're brave in being authentic and not being more than just where you are, and someone loves you there. That's your ride or die. That's your person.
And
that's the person that's there.
You can't respect someone who likes you because of your lies, because it's not about respect. It's about getting validation from them. Impeccability with the word.
Impeccability. That's it. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, buddy.
Good stuff. I appreciate you. Appreciate your impeccability. You've helped me with this. So you've been a great example of this, and I appreciate you. Thank you.
And it's been an absolute honor to watch, like, both of us really grow together in this, because I don't look at myself as a finished product just because I'm maybe a little bit farther down the road with a little more time in this. I still have my shit too, but it really is fun to see you grow and to also watch, like, myself as I continue to grow, and how that shows up just in the way that we get to share and speak in this podcast as we get deeper and deeper into it. So thank you.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you.
See you next time.